G'day, welcome to Partakers and to our Easter 2013 series, AGOG, A Glimpse of God. We are on day 19 of our adventure, looking together at the life of the most amazing person in human history, Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Today we look briefly at Jesus teaching his disciples, and our reading is from Mark chapter 8 verse 14. Jesus got into a boat again and crossed to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. The disciples had forgotten to take any bread along and had only one loaf with them in the boat. Jesus warned them, "Be careful. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod." They had been discussing with one another that they didn't have any bread. Jesus knew what they were saying and asked them, "Why are you discussing the facts that you don't have any bread? Don't you understand yet? Don't you catch on? Are your minds closed? Are you blind and deaf? Don't you remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets did you fill with leftover pieces?" They told him 12. "And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many large baskets did you fill with leftover pieces?" They answered him 7. He asked them, "Don't you catch on yet?" As they came to Bethsaida, some people brought a blind man to Jesus. They begged Jesus to touch him. Jesus took the blind man's hand and led him out of the village. He spit into the man's eyes and placed his hands on him. Jesus asked him, "Can you see anything?" The man looked up and said, "I see people. They look like trees walking around." Then Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes a second time, and the man saw clearly. His sight was normal again. He could see everything clearly, even at a distance. Jesus told him when he sent him home, "Don't go into the village." Jesus and his disciples have now crossed the Sea of Galilee. Jesus on the journey across the sea was warning them about the yeast of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and King Herod. Why does Jesus include King Herod here? Jesus mentions King Herod because Herod was a fickle ruler who was mean and treacherous. He would do everything to compromise with others for his own benefit. Both groups had wanted further signs from Jesus. The Pharisees and the Sadducees, even though great enemies, we saw yesterday ganging up against Jesus. Herod, we discover later from Luke 23, had yearned for Jesus to give him a further sign for a long time. The yeast talked about by Jesus was their hypocrisy and evil. This was seen in evidence in our last study when they asked Jesus for a sign. Yeast in the New Testament is often used to illustrate evil. A little evil can spread a long way. Jesus was also warning his disciples to be convinced of the signs they had already seen, without coveting yet more signs. The disciples, however, were discussing between themselves the problem of not having enough food. They were thinking that the yeast Jesus was talking about was yeast which went into bread. Oh, Jesus knew what they were talking about. They'd obviously forgotten that they had witnessed a great feeding of the masses and that Jesus had the power to feed them. No wonder Jesus seems exasperated with them and rebukes them. It's as if he is saying to them, "Look, guys, don't you realize who I am yet, even though we've been together for a while now? 2 times you've been with me and collected the leftovers after we fed the crowds together. Get a grip, guys." Oh, the disciples had seen and heard, but they were still lacking spiritual discernment and were spiritually blind and deaf. Their hearts were still hardened towards Jesus in that aspect for now. It was also an act of ingratitude towards Jesus that, having twice seen bread created from nothing, including one recent incident, they were now showing anxiety about not having enough bread. Then, as if to exacerbate the point, Mark puts here a little story that isn't in the other Gospels. When they get to Bethsaida, a blind man is brought to Jesus. First, Jesus heals his eyes in part. The man looks and sees people walking as if they were trees, so there's no clarity, yet he has his vision. At least he can see in part. Then the second time, Jesus heals the man's eyes fully, and his sight is restored. Jesus didn't want to be seen as only a healer and miracle worker, so he tells the man not to say anything. Anyway, people will soon find out that the man has been healed, because he will be able to see, and they will be able to see that he can see. Mark is making the point that the disciples at this time were like that blind man. They were like the man at the first stage of healing. They couldn't see the spiritual truths, and they lacked understanding. To the disciples at this time, Jesus was still only a miracle worker, wise man, prophet, and healer. It would not be until later they would fully see. Come back tomorrow for day 20 of our series AGOG, as we continue to look together at that most extraordinary man, Jesus Christ, through the Gospel accounts. We'll see together another example of Jesus teaching his disciples. See you soon at Partakers.